The Empress. The sign of the Hebrew alphabet that corresponds to this arcanum is Gimel, and its number is 3. The hieroglyph is a hand that grabs, arranged in such a way that it forms a narrow channel that can hold something. From the idea of a narrow channel, they move on to the idea of the vagina, which serves as the last stage in the process of birth, and from this to the very idea of birth. Hence come the 3 names of the arcanum, according to the hypostases of the theosophical ternary: divine natura, partus, generatio. The idea of creation is closely linked to the element of love, or, in the broadest sense, to the element of love and attraction. Universal gravitation, common love, compassion, impersonal love. All these manifestations are particular expressions of this general principle. The goddess of attraction is Venus, and one of the erudite names of this arcanum is Venus Urania, that is, Venus of the universe, cosmic Venus. Another erudite name is Physis, the nature. The common name is Empress. Arcanum III, which by its number and geometric symbol evokes the idea of the ternary, has for its geometric symbol a triangle that, according to the character of the ternary, will be ascending or descending. The card shows a seated woman crowned with 12 stars, which symbolize the 12 zodiacal signs. There is a close link between birth on the physical plane and the 12 phases of solar energy received by the Earth. These phases correspond to the progressive presence of the Sun in the 12 zodiacal signs. It is for this reason that in the occult the term zodiac alludes to the physical plane, to physical characteristics. The woman of the card is wrapped in the sun and writhes in the pangs of childbirth. The meaning of Arcanum III is revealed by the presentation of the birth process. The soaring rays involving the woman remind us that the sun, the centre of gravitation, is the example of the planetary love of our system. It is the centre emanating from life and therefore from creation. In her right hand, the woman holds a sceptre topped with the Venus symbol. This means that she reigns permanently for love, for everything that was born and what will be born. The astrological partner of Arcanum III is Venus, whose symbol presents a synthesis of 2 others: the Sun, creative emanation, positivity, and the world of the elements, that is, all the influences of the environment, as we will learn later, the world of elements, of elementals, a set of environmental influences. The symbol of Venus can be interpreted as follows: the constructive emanations, thanks to love, overcome the difficulties of the environment. In her left hand, the woman holds a shield where there is an eagle. This means that the principle of creation embraces the higher spheres. The eagle holds in its beak a cross of equal arms, indication that birth is a natural consequence of the union of the active principle with the passive. The woman again appears seated on a cubic stone placed on a globe, which we will explain later, and under her feet is the moon, which symbolises here the matter of the sublunar world as the lower sphere of creation. Sometimes we find a change in this picture. Instead of being surrounded by the sun, the woman has wings. The wings show that the Isis terrestris comes from Isis celestis. What is the meaning of this arcanum? First of all, it is given by the Gnostic formula: nothing is created, everything is born. That is, there is always a yod which fertilizes a hay, and thereby determines the birth of the 3rd element, Thou. The father, the mother, and the son, the active and the passive neutralized by the androgyne. Arcanum III proclaims the law of the ternary to be general and universal. In addition, for better understanding, we will briefly review some typical ternaries. We begin with the theosophical ternary, archetype, man, nature. We can see here the theological scheme of the Divine Trinity: God in God, or God the Father, God manifesting himself in humanity, or God the Son, and God manifesting himself in nature, or God the Holy Spirit. Speaking of this triple manifestation of the one God, in which a third term neutralizes the two extremes, because humanity connects nature with the archetype, we will take advantage of the opportunity to mention God's three ways of seeking souls. There are souls who seek God the Father for metaphysical paths. There are souls who seek God the Son within their hearts, and human groups are formed in the name of this search. Finally, there are souls who seek God for the contemplation of nature and acceptance of its immutable laws, those who seek the Holy Spirit. You will learn more about this in the secrets of Kabbalah. Now, let's look at an example of a ternary of the type of the rising triangle at the ternary of the Great Arcana. Let us now take the same ternary, archetype, man, nature, in its sense of the life of the universe. Imagine the archetype as something totally harmonious, androgynous, omniscient, well-blessed, possessing the total capacity of action and consequently being able to limit the sphere of activity. This higher principle, using the common expression, is divided into active and passive manifestations, thus giving the scheme of the ascending triangle. Parallel to this conception of the archetype, we will conceive of humanity as a single organism, formed by cells that in the earth are called men, and perhaps they have a different name on other planets. Admitting the existence of such cells in various cosmic worlds, suns, planets, etc., to which they belong, we will obtain the general idea of the universal man, living the life of a collective entity and owning its own will in accordance with the individualization. We'll also talk about nature as a result of the grouping of all elements, both individualized by our worldview and non-individualized, and think of this totality as dynamized by the basic patterns of regular manifestations, such as the principle of causality. These two poles, humanity and nature, will be manifestations of the archetype, first active, the second passive, according to the scheme of our triangle. Here the terms active and passive are taken in relative rather than absolute meaning. Now let's deal with the ternary, clearly suitable for the same type of ternary of the Great Arcana, namely past, present, future. After all, the present as a moment determines by its location the area of what we call the past and the future. Without indicating the moment that we call the present, we are not able to distinguish between these areas. The present emanates the past and future, and in the past it is affected by its relative passive, inert side, it cannot be altered, and the future corresponds to the active aspect. Having brought our two ternaries closer together, we will say that the archetype owns the law of analogies of the present, that the future belongs to humanity similarly, and nature bases its manifestations on the analogy of the past. We go further. Humanity owns the future by the right of human freedom with the help of an instrument called the collective will of humanity. Nature is based on the past in the form of so-called fate, the instrument of which is a rock, blind, inexorable, and therefore inert, as if relatively passive. The archetype has the properties of an androgyne. This property is reflected by the law of pleasure and higher harmony in that great world lamp which is called Providence. Providence, accordingly, is neutral, androgynous, and plays the role of light, illuminating the field of activity of the other two elements. I draw your attention to the fact that in our language the term present has two meanings, one relating to the reality of the object, the other placing the object at a certain point in time. Any method of birth, emanation of anything should be real for the childbearing, emanating in order to be real in the plane of life, manifestations corresponding to it. The formula of the suggestion should be read, you do this, and not you do or you did. An immutable metaphysical or scientific thesis is also formulated in the present tense. The feeling that you will characterize as the past or the future will not be recognized as real by anyone. It will at best be called vague terms like reflex, hallucination, etc. Approaching the two ternaries, we will say that the present, by analogy, corresponds to the archetype, future to humanity, and the past to nature. Returning to our ternary, we will argue with Fabre d'Olivet that world history is based on a mystical triangle. Here we have a diagram, figure 5 in the book. Providence illuminates the present with its light. The will of mankind rushes to build the future, but at the same time it is limited in its manifestations by fate, which nails it to the past. If the will of humanity unites, enters into an alliance with the enlightening influence of Providence, then it is stronger than fate. At this time, the history of humanity is evolutionary. If mankind turns a blind eye to this influence of Providence and engages in martial arts with fate, then a general thesis on the course of its history cannot be expressed. It all depends on the relationship of the forces of will and fate, which is stronger. If humanity consciously fights with its will, with fate, backed up by the instructions of Providence, then this will be defeated. Nothing will come of it. If, finally, mankind attaches its will to the influences of fate, unfavourably assessed by Providence, then the implementations turn out to be very powerful, very sensitive. Perhaps the course of history moves the world away from the principle of harmony and will need subsequent corrections to solve the great problem of the ultimate goals of the existence of the universe. World history at this time is involutive. Let us now try to apply the mystical triangle of Fabre d'Olivet to the life of a particular soul during one of its incarnations. Providence, in a separate human instance, has the representative of the so-called, a conscience that is absolutely neutral, does not push or hold back, but only illuminates the path, indicating how to neutralize in the present moment the good-evil binary. The human will determines future events, but is limited in their choice of the so-called karma. This karma is, as it were, the general form of all previous incarnations of the soul of our person. It was born for the first time in conditions favorable to the acquisition of wisdom, as they say with pure karma. Sinned in the second incarnation. In addition to the task of acquiring wisdom, he still has to clear karma, which will not do without struggling and suffering. Of course, with the second birth, karma puts him in less favorable living conditions. Further incarnations follow the law of alternatives to aggravation and correction of karma until it is finally cleansed. Very aggravated karma, which could not be corrected by conscious efforts of the will alone, is partly corrected by the very element of suffering in the incarnation corresponding to it. The sufferings that a person is doomed to karma can be so strong that they partially redeem karma, even in the case of complete passivity and conscious maliciousness subject during incarnation. Here are some combinations of vertices possible for this particular scheme of the mystical triangle applied to the life of a human being. 1. The will in harmony with the conscience and fighting against karma. The result is purification of karma. 2. The will agreeing with karma, but opposing the indications of consciousness. This is selfish opportunism and results in visible success in life, but with a karmic charge. The struggle of the will against karma, without consulting the conscience. This is number 3. The overall result cannot be determined as it will depend on the respective forces in action. 4. The will against karma and consciousness gathered together. The outcome, failure in life and increase in karma. The staggered ternaries, similar to those analysed in this arcanum, that is, those which present the 3 basic degrees of the same manifestation, we will call absolute ternaries. These will resemble other ternaries, conditionals, that we will call analogous ternaries, binding each conditionally or symbolically to a given absolute ternary. Let us take two examples of such ternaries. The first belonging to the field of nature, and the second according to that of ritual symbolism. Let us analyse the human body, dividing it into the head, thoracic region, and abdominal region. Per analogy, the head will correspond to the mental plane, for the mental manifestations of man incarnate have certain connections with the functions of the brain. The thorax will correspond to the astral plane, even considering only the main role attributed to respiratory exercises in the physical treatment of astral labours. The abdomen will correspond to the physical plane, since the elementary organs are naturally linked to the renewal of the cells of the body. This will be an analogous ternary. We can also give it a slightly different shape. The activity of the head governs the distribution of nerve fluids. That of the chest governs the renewal of the blood, and activity of the abdomen, the restoration of tissues, lymph circulation. Wanting to verify this artificial construction practically, we will analyse separately the head, the analogy of the mental plane, looking at three subplanes of the mental plane. The eyes represent the mentality according to the survey. We conclude superficially about the activity of the individual. The nose will represent the astral body of the head, according to the formation of the same. Superficial conclusions are often drawn regarding the pathology of the thoracic region of the person. The mouth will represent the physical plane. It will be an envoy of the abdominal region, whose disturbances can be perceived through the observation of the lips, the tongue, etc. This subdivision confirms the fact that our ternary is not entirely arbitrary, but has a natural symbolic basis. We will now give an example of an artificial symbolic ternary, explaining the scheme of the famous Trident of Paracelsus. Metal teeth, iron, sheet metal or steel. Cylindrical handle, wooden or hard rubber, something insulating. The device from a practical point of view is a magic sword with 3 points. Let us analyse the inscriptions on the teeth, signs drawn near the base of the teeth, and the golden inscription on the handle. Let's start with the prongs. On the upper, Obito is engraved. Obey, give in, be obedient, heed. This inscription outlines the spheres of passive manifestations of man in the field of life, of the physical plane, or rather, in the field of 3 planes in the presence of incarnation in the physical. On the lower prong we read, Immo, which means, on the contrary, contrary to, in the sense of resistance and showing yourself actively. The middle tooth concludes the inscription, Apdosel, which must be decomposed as follows: Ap, do, sel. Ap must be replaced by Greek, the initial letters of the word arche, beginning, higher element, which equals mens. The syllable do should be read from right to left, odd. This is the name of a positively polarized astral. Therefore, it is an astrosome in the sphere of male manifestations. Sel, Latin sal, means salt. The physical plane symbolizes this very physical plane. So the 3 prongs dictate the phrase with their inscriptions, the 3-component active man, mens plus anima plus corpus, which must balance the binary of obedience and resistance. He must maneuver between these tricks. This ternary outlines the scope of human activity. In the second ternary of signs, the first sign, similar to Cancer, is set instead of the sign of Cancer. This zodiac sign is astrologically the house of the moon, the planetary influence of which leads the passive beginning to the passive upper tooth. The serpent bearing the sign of Jupiter with its head is a symbol of the astral tourbillon, by which the authority, sign of Jupiter, of man, is carried into the astral world. The third sign is the spoiled sign of Leo, of the zodiacal Leo, which serves as the home of the active sun, which conducts its influence in the lower active prong. As you can see, the second ternary belongs to the field of forms that conduct the influence of the handle into the prongs. The handle is decorated with a gold inscription: P, 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 V, L, I, D, O, X, F, A, T, O. Where the triple P should be overturned to obtain the triple lingam, fertilizing in 3 planes. V is the Latin numeral 5, an indication of the pentagram, a symbol of the human will. Li, the initial letters of the word liberate. VLI is the pentagrammatic liberati, freedom of human will. DOX means doxa, awareness, that is, that gives us an element of conscience. FATO, fato, means rock, fate, karma. This means that the hilt tells us about the human right to attempt to produce in 3 planes, and because of the existence of what we place at the top of the mystical triangle of Fabre d'Olivet. This ternary concerns the sphere of the mental, even metaphysical nature or absolute rights to the 3 planes. The whole trident will symbolize man in general in 2 higher planes, hilt, chart of astrological signs, and differentiate him as a man in the physical plane. The middle tooth contains a hint of activity. In practice, the device serves as a magic sword in a man's hand, and in a greatly reduced format is used in emetic medicine in the treatment of male impotence. Here is an example of a system of 3 ternaries in the field of symbolism.